This episode of the Sports Initiative podcast is brought to you by Scoop. Here's Pippa to tell you more.
Hi, my name's Pippa. I'm co-founder of a new sports nutrition startup, and I'm here to tell you about my company, Scoop. Scoop is a new sports nutrition brand in compostable pods. Over the last 18 months, we've developed the first pod-based nutrition shaker that allows you to make an easy, mess-free fitness shake in 3 simple steps. Pop it, shake it, drink it. Scoop's unique system offers many benefits. You can change flavours and supplement whenever you want. It's fast, easy and mess-free to prepare. Our pods are easily transportable so you can take them on the go. And it's 100% compostable. Our first blend, the Workout Whey, is a whey isolate protein drink made from only natural ingredients and is available in 3 delicious flavours. Want to try Scoop? You're in luck. On the 22nd of June at 1 p.m, we're launching Scoop via Kickstarter. By supporting Scoop on Kickstarter, you can save up to 45% on your order and will help us make Scoop a reality. Follow us on Instagram at scoop_en, and for more information, check out www.scoopnutrition.es. Thanks.
Make sure you check out our social media for more information and links to how you can get this product. On this week's episode, we sit down with Greg Mannion, the Junior Academy Manager at Leicester Tigers. He discusses the challenges in late player identification, how they encourage individuals to take ownership of their own player development and what this looks like when they return to their own clubs, and the risk-reward factor during skillful acts such as offloads. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family as we continuously look to grow. I hope you enjoy. Cool. So, Greg, first of all, thanks for spending a bit of your Tuesday morning with me. How are you? Are you all safe and well?
Yeah, good to meet you, Michael, and thanks for inviting me on. Yeah, I'm all good. Having some time at home at the moment, working from home back in Wigan. So really nice to spend some time with my family and my kids. So other than that, all good, and looking forward to going back to work at some point, but don't tell the wife that.
Yeah, I think everyone, although it is nice to spend a bit of time at home, I think everyone's looking forward to getting back in the office and stuff now. So I'm sure she won't blame me on that front. So obviously I reached out to you on social media and just saw some of the work that you were doing and some of your experiences. I thought it would really be interesting. For people that maybe haven't come across you, do you just want to explain kind of a little bit around your background and then what your current role is and what that entails from a kind of day-to-day, week-to-week basis?
So I'm a qualified teacher by trade. So I was at university and did my what was known as a key stage 2-3 transition course. So basically, I had to do all the primary school education, and I bolted that on with a secondary PE delivery. So once qualified, I then was fortunate enough to go and work in a good school in Wigan, which was my old high school, and then I moved into a school in Manchester where very different from my previous school, but really good learning curve. Really opened my eyes up to probably what was going on outside of my own little bubble and what the world actually looks like. So that was really good and an eye opener for me. And on the back of that, I was there to help try and deliver rugby. So being a Wigan lad, obviously I was born and raised on Rugby League, following the great Wigan's team of the 90s for my age. And I was fortunate enough when I was younger, I played a bit of rugby as well. So I was an academy product for Wigan, and then moved to the arch rival St Helens and had a couple of seasons at St Helens. And, you know, in all fairness, it's only taken me 15 years to admit it, but I was never good enough. And although I never saw it, everyone else did. And you know, but I didn't lose that passion for rugby. So in the teaching side, I was always doing my rugby league coaching with either local community teams or school teams. So that's kind of where I started and where I started to pick up some of my coaching. And what then happened was when I was at my last school in Manchester, unfortunately redundancies were coming. And when you get put through the redundancy scenario, I looked at what the criteria were, and And in a nutshell, it was probably going to be me or one other. So I took a leap of faith and chatted with the wife and said, "Look, I'm gonna take my redundancy and I'm gonna go and make sure it's all on my terms, and I'll find a job and work as hard as I can and look after the family." And as I did that, you just didn't know what was going to come, and it was really hard for me to get another teaching job at the time. I was quite well experienced, but not good enough to go into the head of departments or second departments. And a rugby league job came up in Loughborough, so I applied for that with the wife's consent to try and move away from home for a small period of time. And the rugby league job was fantastic. Working, it was based at Loughborough College, but it was running a rugby league program called the Midlands Hurricanes, and I had 2 great years doing it. I had a fantastic time working with some really good lads and loads of fantastic volunteers. And then off the back of that, Leicester Tigers asked, was I interested in working for them? And that was a shock because I'd never really looked at rugby union. Again, in the area I was, it was very much rugby league only. So weighed it up, had a couple of chats with some people's opinions who I have high respect for, and yeah, I took at the time another leap of faith to move into rugby union. And to be totally honest with you, I've never really looked back. It's been fantastic. They've looked after me so well, and since I've been there, I've gone from being on the ground and working on the DPP and supporting the coaches to being the junior academy manager, where I look after the DPP itself, so the 14 to 16s pathway, making sure we have a strong, vibrant system which allows us to recruit the best potential players. And alongside of that, I then do coaching with Brooksby, which is what's known as the ACE program. So that's our official college BTEC provider. So I do the delivery there, and the lead coach for them. And I also assist and help out with the academy as well. So quite a varied role. I've had lots of other intricate roles in between all of that. So I was an England colleges head coach. I've been the academy coach, like development officer. So I do some of the coach mentoring. I do some mentoring back in Wigan with some local coaches. So yeah, that's kind of me and a little bit of how I've got to where I am. I know you said a nutshell. I've probably gone on a bit longer there, but.
No, that's fine. I think it's highlighted lots of different areas and things to discuss, which is great. So I think if we start from kind of where you are now, so obviously you mentioned about the DPP, which is obviously development player pathway, etc. So what does that look like for Leicester Tigers? What does that pathway through to, I guess, the first team look like, and how in an ideal context do players make that transition all the way through with the club?
Yeah, so the DPP, or the developing player program is we've identified it as an area for opportunity. So it's an area for players to have an opportunity to develop themselves. So it's not something we technically say is for the elite players in the region, but what we say is it's for the players who need that extra challenge and support. And the reason why we're like that is because actually we work with a large base of players. So we run via 4 centres based in our regions. Now, our regions are given to us by the RFU, just for that little background. So the RFU give us our areas where we can recruit players from. So what we have is we have a centre in each one. Each one roughly holds around about probably about 150 kids in that at the ages of 14, 15 and 16. And throughout the year, we provide a number of sessions and opportunities for lads to train. And within the under 14s, they might get one playing or festival or opportunity where they'll play inter-region, so region against region. But under 15s, you'll get 2 inter-regional opportunities, and then there's potential for a summer camp for a smaller number of players. Under 16s, it's very much the same scenario, other than when we get to the after Christmas period, we try to reduce our group down. It goes roughly from around about 120 to 40, and then that 40 then usually gets a little bit smaller as it's then picked into an academy group. So that's roughly what our DPP looks like. Obviously, it's ever changing, ever evolving as we're constantly analysing and assessing what we do and how we go about it. In terms of the player pathway as well, and the journey a player goes through, it's quite varied and it's very, very, very individualised. So it depends on the player. So we can identify players who started at 14 and actually are currently first team in England internationals and have gone all the way through the programme and the system. But at the same time, we can identify players who came in at 14, left at 16, came back in at 17, 18, and in fact are actually potential first team players at other Premiership clubs or back in at Leicester Tigers. We've got lads who've actually bypassed the 14 to 16 programme. We picked them up at the very end of the 16s playing county rugby for the region. And they've then come into our system. So it's all very individualised, and we try and make sure it's just a strong breadth of study so that they understand all the challenges and the different skills and the different ways of coaching and developing players. And then we're looking at how the players themselves take the information and develop. And then that's where we try and start with our DPP.
And so do you guys have like a traditional, I guess, football academy that works alongside it? Or is that your base in terms of you don't have a traditional academy, you have these development centres, and then obviously they feed in, I guess, at the older age groups when they start going to college and all that type of stuff?
So we don't have anything that runs alongside. There's not like a gold group and a silver group or a specific group. It is an open environment where, you know, we'll start with our base as broad as we can. We'll provide opportunities for entry and re-entry and almost like a re-evaluation sort of where they're at and how we can support players. Sometimes we'll ask players to leave at certain parts of the program because we feel the challenge is not right for them or it's just not at the right level at the moment. And then there are times when we'll bring players in and we'll try and consider how we challenge them further in order to get more out of those players. It's only when they reach into the academy that we have more of what would be seen as a traditional academy program. But even then, in rugby union terms, it's still quite limited access. So like within a football academy, I imagine you'll be seeing your players five times a week.
Whereas, yeah, something around that, yeah.
Yeah, whereas, you know, other than pre-season, when they go into the schools and the colleges, we'll see them twice a week. So we'll only see them twice a week, and we put a lot of faith and trust in our schools programs and partners that we have.
Okay, so that's brought up loads of questions. I'm going to try and order this that I think's best. So if we're looking at obviously you're aiding players with that transition, if they're jumping in and out, so at times you're going to have awkward conversations with lads and say, obviously the challenge isn't right. How do you go about framing those conversations where there isn't resentment off the back of it? Because I could imagine, and I'm talking from a football context and I can talk from a personal context, if you get released from someone there is a certain level of resentment at that period of time against that club. So how do you manage that conversation where actually they are comfortable with saying, we know what, I'm not currently in the pathway at 15s, but I want to work so I could get an opportunity at 17 rather than just going, I'm never going back to them. That's terrible.
Yeah, so it comes back to something I heard Sean Wayne, who's the current England Rugby League head coach, talk about. And it's something I've kind of always felt was the case as well, is that selection and deselection should never really be a shock. If it's a shock to the player, then we've got something wrong in our system because perception and reality are nowhere near one another. So we try and encourage that there's a constant honesty in what we're doing in terms of where players are at and how they're getting on, and we try to encourage those micro chats around the side of the pitch or with players and really try and give them an understanding of where they are in the grand scheme. Now, there'll still be moments where players can be resentful to the information they're getting because, again, it's not what they want to hear. And again, it goes into that honesty. So it's making sure that our feedback is honest and credible. And it's making sure that the information we're providing them and sharing with them is relevant to the development. So if we were to say release a player from the system, it's not a case of thanks very much, we're not keeping you, off you go. It's actually, you know, these are the reasons what we see at the moment. This is what we're looking at in terms of where we think you need to be next time. We've got local scouts and people in the area who can come and watch. We have contact with the coaches who can update us on your development. when we have our open opportunities in our days of assessment, we'd expect you to be brought back into the assessment so we can have a look at where you are. We use examples of players who've come in and out to show that actually it's not just words. It's actually there's some evidence behind players who have done the same sort of journeys.
Is there any high-profile examples of that?
You've asked me now. I knew this question would be asked. So, who's the high-profile end of that? So, at the moment, we've just promoted a kid into the DPP. No, sorry, into the academy. He was one of the players who actually missed the whole DPP and was picked up by playing county. And because he was playing county, he was quite successful. And he's just been given an opportunity to be a first-team player. We have a lad who has just signed at Sale. And what happened was he was in the pathway at 14 to 16, but didn't get taken into the academy. Went to the Brooksby Melton College programme and was actually brought back in his second year of college, played the year of academy, and played very well and was in contention for a potential opportunity to be a first-team player, but just missed out for whatever reasons the club decided. And now he's gone to university and he's playing at Sale. So, there are players in the environment who do that. There have been players in the past who have either now moved on from the club, but were those in and out players. But yeah, we have got them players in the pathway in the system.
Okay, so sorry, I interrupted you there. So yeah, as you say, it's kind of not being a shock for the lads, and then giving them previous that. Are you able to provide them with any like tangible support when they're away, or is that kind of left down to them and the clubs that they're working with?
Yeah, so that's one of the harder ones, because if you think of the number of players in the pathway, we only get given a set number of hours via the RFU. So because of that, you don't have as much time as you'd like. So what we have to try and do is provide the players with as much as we can, and to kind of combat that, we try and get the coaches to be involved and ask questions about what our pathway is. So we try and provide CPD for the coaches in the area, which gives them insights to what we do. We try and encourage them to be at training sessions when they're free, if they've got the time to do. I know volunteer coaches find that tougher. But we're trying to be as open and transparent as we can, because if players go back into the local club, it's quite hard for us to be able to give them real support. So we have to then put our trust and faith in the player and the people around them to support them effectively.
No, that makes complete sense. So I guess the next question this brings me on to is, when you're looking at a Leicester Tigers team or someone within your pathway, what is kind of your way? What do you want your players to be able to do? I appreciate this is particularly difficult in rugby, because what you expect your fullback or scrum half to do is very different to what you want your hooker or prop to do. But is there kind of a base skill set or base non-negotiables that you have for players within your pathway?
So it's really interesting, because the variants that you can look into for what makes a future player are so vast in our environment, and that's not a cop out to your question. But I've presented before on some player identification CPDs, and the first thing I always start with is and it's the big question in rugby, is it's a genetic thing, and you can be labelled with you only pick the biggest and fastest kids that you can find, and whilst I'll refute that, that's not exactly what we do. You have to be realistic at the same time and understand, though, that if a kid is showing signs of being 6'7", 6'8", we can't coach anybody to be that tall. So there is an advantage to being genetically tall or genetically wide, where you can carry a large amount of weight to then potentially be a front rower. If you can run the 100 meters in your region as a 15, 16-year-old quicker than anybody else in your region, then there's an element that we can't coach that sort of pace. We can work on running techniques and all that. But, so you can't disclaim a genetical thing. But where we have to load our data and our understanding of identification is that there's a load of other components what come with that. So we'll have a look into quartile rates and figure out, where are they born within the year and what impact does that have on the player. We'll have a look at what the background data is of the player who we're looking at in terms of, has he played club rugby since he was 4? Does he come from a sporting family? Is he an only child? Is he the youngest of his family, or is he the oldest of his family? Because they'll play impacts in terms of what we see. Understanding the social standings within the sessions. So does he command the sessions because socially he's more accepted than others? And is that because he's one of, say, 7 kids from the same team? Or is he a player from a completely isolated team and is the only player? And then all of a sudden that gives you a different perspective on the individual. And then we start to fall in the lines of some psychological stuff as well, though. But we're also assessing the general skills, of course. We're looking for lads who can catch and pass, who can tackle, who can make decisions. And sometimes we're not concerned about the outcome of the decision, but actually, can they make decisions? So can they put themselves into uncomfortable places and try to make some effective outcomes by what they see and what they do? And if they don't always come off, we're to a point we're happy with that, as long as they are learning and showing signs of development from that situation. So I find it's quite a large spectrum that we have to really be aware of. And I suppose, like every team, you want coachable kids. You want kids who are going to be open to suggestions and ideas, but you also want players who will come back at you and will challenge what you say. You don't just want the yes kids. You want the players who go, I understand that, but why? Or I can see this instead. Is that a bad thing? Or, but what happens if this happens? You want those players who challenge you and you can challenge them, rather than the player who either just says yes or nods, but then goes off and does whatever he's been doing anyway. So it's quite a difficult area of identification that we find, or that I find personally within rugby. But we have lots of information to try and support what we make our decisions based on.
Yeah, and I guess what this leads to is challenging for you guys. Like, fly halves are very different in their style of play. You even look at the top level, like you get some that are very pragmatic, that actually, I know they hate the term, but are very good game managers. So they understand when to turn the defense round and, look to play for line outs and scrums, all that type of stuff. You have others that are way more expansive and look to, try and entice defenders in to play through gaps. How does that factor into your identification process? Because I can imagine kind of at the top levels, if I look at this in a football context, at the top level, it'd be very easy for a football team to go, okay, we're all going to play like Pep and do like that. But if Pep gets sacked 2 months from now and a different coach comes in, you have to realign your academy. So within football academies, for the most part, not always, but they try and stick to like a blueprint of going, this is kind of what we want our players to be able to do. How does that look in rugby? Do you have that pathway as well? Where you go, we want our fly halves to be able to, kick long distance or be able to deal with contact? Do you have any factors around that?
Not necessarily. Again, players will be taken on an individual basis. So if we use the fly half example, if we've got one player who's very forward thinking and attack minded compared to a player who's much more game management and almost possession based in terms of how they play, then what we're looking for is again how them players react to challenge, how those players can adapt or vary what they do on the pitch. So a game-based player will still need to go and attack the line and be aggressive at the line. So as a bias with my backs cap on, I want players who will play at the line, and I want fly halves who will take the ball forward and be prepared to be hit, but knowing that actually by doing that he's pulling players out of positions and allowing his teammates to go through. But we want to see the players challenge and can they react to that. If we've got the player who's much more attack focused, we'll set challenges in terms of, can he see space to kick, or does he have the ability to control his players on his left and right and be able to organise them? Because we know in the future that not every game he's going to be able to play exactly how he wants to. So we'll take every player on an individual basis as much as we can, and we'll set them the challenges and the parameters to challenge their skill sets. And that's then when we start to identify who the potential fly half is to take through. And if both in this instance were just as strong and effective and adapted well, then we take them through, because, like you said yourself, we don't know what the future of the game looks like, but we know that we've got two very credible fly halves who can offer us two various games, and we know that they can be added to in terms of their skill set.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess around the identification side, being at that 14s age group, that's where you begin to see some people that got a long beard like mine and get a deep voice, and other kids that maybe still haven't quite gone through puberty yet and still got a squeaky voice and all that type of stuff. And obviously that's going to bring, I guess, challenges in terms of the physical capabilities of those players, but also for yourselves, a challenge of, to an nth, predicting the future of going, well, this player is able to run through him now, but will he be able to 6 months, a year, 2 years from now? So how do you manage that identification process around that kind of quartile factor, that bio-banding, early maturation factor type stuff?
Yeah. So you're always looking for resilience, and you're always looking for players who, and again, I'll sound like I can repeat myself at times. You're looking for players who can adapt to what they do, and you're looking for players who can also stick it out when the outcomes are not what they want. And sometimes that can be the same player. So sometimes that can be your early maturing, your physically big, your quartile one kid, which is stereotypically what we think when we say that. So, yeah, but at the same time, it could be your stereotypical Q4, bottom end of the scale, low maturation. So if we take our stereotypical small kid, we're looking for the player who can still put himself in positions to try and have impact on the game, who doesn't take being knocked down or backwards or have a setback, who doesn't take that personal, apart from the fact that he wants to try and do it again. And all of a sudden, you see little nuggets like that, and you know that there's something in there. And as a program, then we have to figure out how long does that enable you to keep them in a system to monitor what they do. If it's the opposite way, then again, I've got no issue in watching a big kid run over somebody or smash them in a tackle, because that's the game, and lads have got to be able to do that. But once you've done it once or twice, I don't need to see that kid do it to the same opposition every session. What I need to then see him is actually, well, can he use his footwork to avoid front-on collisions and find what we call soft shoulders? Or can he start to develop his catch and pass game so that as he goes at the line, can he play players through the hole because players are sucked into him because of the pure size? And that's where sometimes we get some of our further discussions, and our identification takes a really interesting conversation, because it's the small things you sometimes don't see, which is what potentially makes the bigger impact for the player. So can he tip at the line and play? Or can he move the ball well? Or can he impact the game without physically touching the ball because he's 6'3" and he's early maturing? Or is he a small diminutive player, but he's getting himself involved? He's putting himself in front of players who are clearly going to be physically dominant, but he makes his efforts. If he makes his tackles, fantastic. If he doesn't make his tackle and his technique's way off, then we have to be mindful of that. But actually, if he's putting himself in some good positions but just can't physically match it, that's not a bad thing. And that's kind of going with them scale. Now, where we were trying to get something into our system and our DPP last year, but obviously it didn't happen because of COVID, but we were also looking at a little bit of vertical learning. Now, I'm sure you listen to me. Like, vertical learning is where we kind of partner up our 14s, 15s, and 16s into one-off sessions. And the idea was going to be every few weeks, probably 3 weeks, we'd have probably looked at a vertical learning session. That was the plan I was kind of getting in place, and that was to go more of a technical style session, but it was to then challenge some of those perceptions. So if you are your big kid in your under 15s, but we see potential, what happens when you step into the big kids of the under 16s? Or or the lesser of the under 16s? Are you better than what's ahead of you, or are you at the bottom of that level at that moment? And then psychologically, how do you handle going from being able to run through everybody to then going against lads who can match you physically? And what does that do to then how you train, how you perform, how you reflect on your own performance and things like that? So I was really looking forward to seeing how we get that in, but COVID's not allowed us to fully explore that yet. So potentially that's what might happen next year.
Yeah, no, I think, playing that across age groups and stuff is really interesting. I know we do a lot of work around just doing years of birth. When we play on the continent, they often go year of birth, so 2009 born. So all of a sudden you take your Q1s out of the picture, so then it's a completely different ball game. And what you generally find is that the foreign teams have a load of Q1s of the year. So if it's 2009 born, they'll have January, February, March. Yeah. And we end up with a lot of September, October, Novembers right at the end, and you see the physical mismatch and the other way around, which is interesting. Looping back to one thing that you mentioned earlier around kind of developing players individually, how do you go around developing those skills? Say it is a big lad, but it's still being position relative. So I'd imagine like you can say if you've got a lad who's going to be 6'7", we think, or he's going to be a big and he's going to be a second row. You still want to give him exposure to being in the scrum, etc. But if you're working for him to get more opportunities of offloads and all that type of stuff, it might be technically better for him to play inside centre where he's going to get a lot of the ball and is going to have that opportunity. So how do you go around managing that transition and individualized approach for the players?
Yeah, so we actually don't have a big position specific focus within the DPP. It comes as we get to under 16s, latter end of 15s into under 16s, when we'll start to introduce some what we'll call unit sessions, where they'll start to learn some scrum postures, some lifting techniques, especially in the forwards, because obviously the set piece is key in the game. The backs will have a little bit more honed in focus on some kicking techniques and some lines of running and some manipulation of defenders. But actually throughout the DPP, it's quite a broad skill curriculum, which is often delivered through these like the style of games and breakouts. So I have no issue. We will do drills at times with players because it sometimes can be relevant and it can work for what we need. But we'll also have lots of games in what we're doing as well, and you'll have those in between. So at the moment, I'm looking at an idea about short, medium, and long sessions. So shorts being like 1v1s or one-on-ones or some very simple technical, well not simple, some technical delivery. That medium bit is where you build up on your games. You might have more 6v6s, 5v5. So, your small-sided games. And then we go long where we're looking at more bigger picture stuff and larger numbers against each other on the ideas of that. Now, our sessions at DPP are very much like that. So we've got a fantastic group of volunteer coaches who, we give them a curriculum of what we're looking at and the skills we want to develop. And we give them a curriculum over the year, and then we ask the coaches to deliver the sessions how they feel best suits on that. So we have some variability in the delivery, but it's all within a theme or an objective that's set out by us as a club. And the sessions very much have that opportunity for players to put themselves into the variety of positions, rather than it being this is an opportunity for you to be the only 9 and you to be the only 10 and you're this position, you're that position. Actually, this is the game. So like as an example, like I like to play a 4-channel game. So you can only have one phase per channel consecutively. So you've got four areas of the pitch. You can move the ball as much or as little as you want, but you've got to stay out of the channel you've previously been in. Well, sometimes the 9s and 10s who are 9s and 10s at club will take ownership of that and try and dominate that. But then you add in like a 2-pass rule, and all of a sudden then he's got the 10's got to pass the ball, or the player at first receiver, I would like to say that he has to then pass the ball to somebody else. And that somebody else could be a front row, it could be a second, it could be anybody in the club position, but in the game, it just means you then have to have a second receiver. So the language is not necessarily based on this is the 9s and 10s. It's a 2-pass game, or it's a a 4-channel game. But it relates back to the fact that this session's all about catch and pass. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. I think it's really interesting. So I would have thought that would have been really late to make that transition into positions. I don't know what your thoughts on that is.
Well, again, and it's interesting. So, like, one of the most high profile that I'm aware of, anyway, in transitions is club captain Tom Youngs came through the program and the system as a centre, but has become a British and Irish Lion as a hooker. So, and I think he must have changed positions. It must have been going into his start of his professional career at Tigers. It weren't in an academy when he changed position. Now, that's one example, and I'm very aware that for every one example like that, you might have 5 examples of lads who were front rowers and are front rowers and stayed front rowers. And again, there are some positions that we know where it's very obvious where you're going to be. There's very rarely going to be a 6'8", like, other than Fred Stewart, but very rarely they're going to end up being second rowers. So there are and your front rowers who can carry weight and can be powerful players. It tends to suit their body size because that tends to be part of the process. But actually, within the rest of the positions, there's quite a bit of fluidity where they could move, and it's not necessarily set in stone. The other thing to consider as well is that when you watch club rugby, and I couldn't say it for everything because I don't watch enough junior sports, but I could probably imagine in most of the games, depending on who coaches the community sides that you're watching, will probably have a large impact on where players are playing. So, and also the social status within that community game will also have an impact in what position the kids are playing. So because of that, you don't sometimes get a true reflection of where players' best positions are, because the early maturing kid who has been playing since he's 4 is the younger sibling of 3 rugby playing peers, might be really confident on the pitch and bullshit and can catch and pass and can run and can tackle because he's had all them challenges at home to survive with his brothers and sisters, and he knows the games. He's been dragged to all these games since he's been a youngster. So he realistically looks like your best potential, say, fly half as an example. But actually, it might be the fact that actually he can facilitate the community game a lot better because he's got that social status where if he says things, players around him listen, and he doesn't get challenged by the other players because they see him as a better player. Now, physically, he might also be really suited to becoming a centre or a fullback, or actually he could be a flanker. But the club he's at might not have needed a flanker because they might see there's players who are limited in, say, the catch and pass, but are really good at jackling. So it's a really interesting dynamic, and it's not a case of every player changes position and we pick positions late and we just go, we think you're this and this. But actually, we have to be aware of, again, the background of what they've been involved in, where they're from, how much rugby exposure they had, and also what do we think is going to be the best potential position moving forward so that we can give them the best opportunity if they're going to carry on with us.
This may sound derogatory, and I don't want it to come across that way to anyone listening, but do you think that's why kind of the standard of your forward players with ball in hand is increasing? Because actually we're not pigeonholing them really early on, and they are getting exposure to catching and passing, offloads, all that type of stuff. Because I look at like Billy Venipola, for example, you actually look at the way that he carries the ball, and if you go back 10, 15 years, that might not have, his skill set is really good. You can look all kind of across the globe, and actually you've got props and hookers who are very good in contact, enticing defenders in and offloading, all that type of stuff. Do you think that the methodology of just allowing players to play and then pigeonholing them later is kind of upskilling the players in general?
So the reason why I pause is because up until 4 or 5 years ago, rugby union was not what I was passionate about because, I'm a rugby league lad. So, and I always found it really interesting. So, I've grown up in an era where I was fortunate enough to being in an environment where James Graham played. Now, for those who don't know James Graham, James Graham for me is one of the best rugby players I've seen play rugby league ever. Like he was a front rower prop forward who could play like a halfback. He could command games like a halfback, but he could carry and he was tough. And what I saw a rugby player with a number on his back. And I think the game of rugby union since coming in it's very heavily dominated by set piece at the highest level. There's no getting away from that. Set pieces are crucial to the game, and that's why it's different to rugby league. But I do think that people are starting to try and develop rugby players first before they develop positional players. And I do use the word rugby players because for me, a rugby player is someone who can catch, pass, run, tackle, jackal in our game. And yeah, the nuances to the positions that they're playing in, I think you can bolt on later once that they've got that breadth of study to be able to adapt. And that's why it's really important in our process that we look for players who can adapt and who can be coachable and who can be supported and take on challenge and feedback. And again, look, there will be players who will just be out and out front rowers because that's naturally what's going to occur. But you've still got to challenge them. You can't just accept that they're going to earn the money being the scrummagers or the lifters in the line-out. You've got to still challenge them because they have to be able to play the game as well as be crucial in their position.
I think also like you have different types of players within those, don't you? So I look at like, and this was me growing up, Steve Thompson, who played for England, World Cup winner. I think, the media at least said he wasn't great with the lineouts, but actually the way he used to go through contact is able to get around. His ability on the ball was one of the key factors for him maintaining a role within that team. So you can look at it and go, different clubs look for different things. If you're trying to be really, really expansive, you're probably going to want your pack to be able to have hands on the ball and be able to increase contact. If you're going very South Africa at the moment, which is a massive pack, and you're going to play for scrummages and lineouts, that might not be one of the top things on your hit list, but it's kind of having a buffet of players to choose from.
And you're right in what you say. It all links into how your team wants to play and what they see the game as moving forward. Now, I'm still also, as much as I say about that, Preston, I'm still also very supportive of the fact that, as an example, we said a hooker, but if you are a hooker, you have to be able to throw. That can't be a negotiable. Throwing is a key part of your position in your game. Yes, we'll still be able to work on it, develop it. And if your point of difference is you can move the ball like a back, or you can you can hit the line and run through players like a front rower, or then they're great, and that's what gives you the advantage to getting more time with people and more time in programs. Then great. But also at the same time, if you've got a kid who can just hit everything as a hooker, well, then we're really confident in our coaching ability that we can then add on other things to them again. But it will come back to them being coachable, being adaptable, and embracing challenge and understanding that feedback doesn't mean you're really good or really poor. It's feedback to help you get better, full stop.
Okay, so moving on to something you mentioned earlier. Obviously, you said you kind of transferred from league to union. I guess the biggest question for you, did you see a cultural difference between the two codes? And if you did, kind of what was that?
So, yeah, there's a difference culturally in terms of, I found probably the most difficult part was the fact that a lot of the rugby union lads had lots of other hobbies and interests alongside of the rugby union, and that's that. I'm not saying that's a negative thing. It was just a shock as such, because actually in a rugby league environment, a lot of the lads are very much really tough rugby league kids who just want to play the one sport. Now you'll still, but yeah, I'm not saying that's a blanket, because I'm definitely seeing a modern change in terms of the players of coming through systems and who are on the circuits of community areas. But especially when I got into the schools environment, it was always very apparent that the schools would have one term of rugby, and then they'd have a cricket or a hockey term, and lads would very much be involved in that. Whereas in state schools, lads would do normally their PE lessons, but then they'd go home and play their sport, which was usually a rugby league game or football rugby league maximum. So that was one of the things that I just found different, not in a bad way. It was just something I had to get my head around and figure out how that worked, and what that meant for development of players. Obviously, research and everything now tells you that the more sports that they're involved in and the late specialisation, the better that should allow them to be. And there's been some good evidence of that, I would say. I suppose the other thing that I found different was the involvement of schools and how schools rugby played a really large part. So rugby league, schools rugby is okay, and there's some fantastic rugby schools, but most of your coaching is done via your community club, and then if you're fortunate enough to go into their scholarship programs. And those scholarship programs would have contact time of 2-3 times a week, whereas within our environment, if lads are at the independent schools and they get that term of rugby, then they're getting a term's worth of delivery by some very good coaches, in comparison to their peers who are at state school. And because of some of the regions that we are able to recruit from, they're very football dominated. So the high schools don't do rugby, or if they do, it's very limited. So already that was creating some slight differences in what was coming to you and the abilities that you saw. And I found that was one of the hardest parts for me to then, when identifying players and then working with players, is understanding just how big the gap and level was within the same age group. If one kid had been at an independent school, say for a year, and a kid who hasn't, and again, that's not a blanket statement. There will be players who were just as good. Yeah.
Yeah, just the training age, isn't it? If you look at actually the training age of a player, someone who's playing 3 or 4 times a week and is getting exposed to high level coaching is just going to have a much higher training age, much broader knowledge base of skills and challenges than the kid that does it once a week for 12 weeks with a PE teacher who might specialize in hockey or football, but also knows a decent amount about rugby as well.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, you have to understand them variants, because again, it gives you pictures, but it sometimes will provide you with some false positives and some some various other things can get thrown into it. So it made it really interesting for me to understand that whole dynamic. But actually, personally, I felt it's benefited me because it's allowed me to understand coaching and player identification a lot more, and just how much more there is to what we see on a field. So that's been something I really enjoyed actually in coming across though.
Okay, so looking at kind of skill, I guess one of the things you mentioned with rugby league, and I guess from the limited exposure I have, is in terms of the way that they are able to kind of embrace contact and then look to offload. It's a big part of getting extra phases or extending phases within the game. And I'd say that that's probably something that traditionally didn't happen too much in Union. And I've seen, again, this is from the outside perspective, is coming more and more. Would you agree that it's kind of coming more and more? And then I guess from a skill development point of view, how do you go around teaching kids this? How do you go around? You've been kind of a backs coach, backs and skills coach, all that type of stuff. So how do you go about actually trying to make the players more skillful in these types of areas?
So there's a couple of things what I want to address on that. So the first part is the games themselves are very similar but so different. So in a rugby league environment, I can run the ball in and I can get tackled by my opponents, and if they win the collision, they're gonna hurt me. They're gonna put me on the ground, and it's gonna be uncomfortable. But as long as I stand up and keep hold of the ball, I play the ball behind me, and we play on and go again. So it doesn't matter if I'm upright, low to the ground. It doesn't matter if they win the collision or I win the collision. I mean, it does in the technical aspects and the possession of the game, but generically. Whereas in a rugby union environment, if I go up too upright and I can't get to the ground, then I lose the ball. If I go in too upright and lose the collision, I'm in a poor position to then retrieve the ball back from my team. So I have to consider then what my body height is and what my angle of trajectory is into the defender, and actually then when I am tackled, how much movement do I have to produce on the floor to get the ball back. So in the game, straight away, there's a slight dynamic in terms of why and when you might offload. So you have to understand that bit for me is sometimes what one of the big differences is, which means you have to appreciate why the games are so different. In terms of coaching for the example of the offload and the ability to keep the ball alive, one of the areas I really try and focus on is the ball grip. Now, I've seen lots and lots of rugby league sessions where ball grip and the ability to control the ball with one hand is really crucial. Whereas in a rugby union environment, I've not seen the grip on the ball as much. I've seen more just encouragement of, can you go into contact and find a way to get the ball out? Now, I like the idea about being able to control the ball and grip the ball and exchange the ball between hands, because that gives you security and a little bit more security in terms of in contact, what you then can and cannot do. But then at the same time, it's good to layer on the fact that actually you're going to go into a collision. Are you going to win the collision and go forward and make meters? Are you going to win the collision and then try and move your body in order to then release the ball so you can speed the game or create an offload or get an extra phase? Or are you going to go into collision to then, go to ground, but then have the ability and the dexterity to then be able to place the ball or lift the ball off the ground to somebody who can then speed the game up again? So it comes down to some decision making, giving them the understanding of how to hold the ball, maybe ways to maybe grip the ball in order to then create an offload or a body position so that you can free yourself to then release that. It is something we can build into it. So it's a combination, going back to what we said before, it's a combination of doing some very slow and very short practical designs before then allowing them to go into some real live environments where it's a case of solve the problem what's in front of you.
And I guess what's challenging in that, particularly in a union context, is you've got all those decisions in a very short period of time. So obviously in a league context, if you're going in quite upright, you might be in a position where the person's there, so actually you can start surveying the area around you. Whereas in a union context, you might be going, okay, is there anyone around me? All of a sudden you get hit, and then you're like, I'm in a world of trouble now. I can't twist my body. I'm not going to be able to present this. And it, like, getting the risk wrong means that actually there's quite strong ramifications. Whereas in a league context, you might lose a couple of meters, but you're not going to lose possession of the ball kind of by your own try line. So how do you go around getting players to identify that risk and reward quickly, and then identify maybe what's the skill needed at that moment in time?
Yeah, so I like to challenge players with reflective moments. So if we're not doing continuous game-based practice at that time, then I will challenge players with almost like a 10-second window where they can reflect on the outcome of what's happened and the processes that may have occurred with people around them. And they can fire questions to each other. Now, I'm only looking at short questions like, so was my body height too high? Or did you see the ball? Or, did you feel my leg drive? Or little questions to fire responses to make them think about what they were doing and challenge that process they went through.
Is that in the session?
Yeah, so I will try and challenge players within the session. So again, if it's drill or random block praise based practice, then yeah, they'll be trying to encourage 10-second windows. So if one's working, then rotating round to then come back into, that's an opportunity to get that conversation in. And I want them short, sharp, just a quick process-based question, because the outcome is almost evidence from the moment that the activity's ended. You've either won the collision or you've not. If we've got the opportunity with like the academy, we'll then look at actually reflective practice within training. So we'll use the video analysis to then fire up questions, show some video footage, create one-on-one conversations, group conversations, and try and get them to reflect on what's happened, how they've seen the situation, and where that's occurred. If we're talking back down now on the ground and on the floor, yes, we've got limited time to be able to make some decisions. So actually, we try and give them a couple of small identifications to give them maybe the nod of whether they're going to win or lose that collision. So
what would those be?
So some simpler ones would be things like, are they slow in getting set as a defender? So has the ruck speed been too quick, and have they had to, say, travel back a metre or two to get onside? Because straight away, if they're on the back foot, we're probably going to win that collision. If they're set early because the ruck's slow, then do we think running it straight effectively is going to be really useful or effective? Or do we need to then change what we were doing or create a new movement pattern to try and create the soft shoulders? If we see players sat on the heels, then we try and encourage sometimes to go forward at the player more, because players sat on the heels means they've got no momentum to go forward. It's when their feet come in closer and more in a split stance that actually the defender's probably going to be in a winning position. So we can try and see if we can identify some of those. The other things you can honestly say is, if you're bigger than the kid in front of you, you've probably got a better chance than if the kid in front of you is bigger. Again, it's not a science. There are small players, and I played against lads who were so much smaller than me when I was playing in the systems, and they would dunk me all the time because their tackle technique was just much better than what my running technique was at that moment. But again, you can try and give those little pointers as well, to try and help them with some ideas or decisions they want to make. But effectively, it's about giving them the opportunity to experience it, reflect on it, and then go and do it again.
So when we're doing this in a session context, do you have obviously you used the 4-channel game earlier as a really good example of the type of practice that you would put on? Are there certain practices you'll do to try and encompass this? Like if I look at him, for example, in a football context, just easier for me. If I'm looking at crossing and finishing from wide areas, I might put a points emphasis on if you can cross the ball from the wider area and score with a first-time pass, that's worth 3 goals, for example. Is there a similar kind of system, or is there similar techniques you use to really focus in on those type of interactions for the players?
Yeah, so I say it's commonly known as Fiji touch. This is probably where loads of people will send you messages to say I give the wrong name, but effectively the game is where, first point of contact. Carry on. You can carry on running. If the same person's being touched by a second defender, then it's a turnover. So then, obviously, it's encouraging players to be closer to the man for support or for tip-on passes and things like that. So that Fiji touch game kind of encourages that, and then it makes the decision about, do I just run at the line and try and break that 1v1 tackle, or if there's 3 defenders in front of me, I've got to be really smart in how I use the ball or move it. Once I've made a break, a player's in support, so I can pass the ball to them or offload to them. And that tends to come in a touch variation of the game. I've played games before where, and you can work in 3v3s, 5v5, so, whatever numbers you want it to be, but effectively it's a one-phase game. So within the one-phase game, the idea is it's not long in distance, so your width of your pitch, or your length of your pitch, it can only be, it only has to be like 15, 20 metres, because we're not looking at maximum running distance. But the idea is that it's only a one-phase game, so the defenders know straight away if they can kill your attack and take you to ground, there's no second phase, you get the points. But as attackers, you've got to keep the ball alive, you've got to move it, you've got to, if they then get you in the tackle, you've got to figure out to get the ball out. It becomes chaotic, but with chaos becomes learning moments, and from those moments we can then really home in on what was successful for us and what maybe clouded our judgment.
Yeah, no, so that makes complete sense. I guess looking at it from a challenging point of view for you guys is there's limited amount of, I guess, full-on contact you can have with the players. So in terms of like getting them in actually real life drill situations where they are going 100%, I'd imagine during the week that's very limited on the amount of time you can do that. So it's trying to replicate those types of scenarios in a lesser contact way, if you like, and preparing the players for going, well, this is what you might experience when you're then getting mashed at a weekend.
Yeah, there's times where you can get away with it because you get them right in the middle of the week. So we'll only see these lads once a week if we're talking DPP. and sometimes you'll see them once every 2 weeks. So actually, what we've got to do is we've got to plant a seed about a skill, which makes them want to go and experiment and figure out more and learn a little bit more. And the challenge then is for them to go into their environment and challenge that skill and take that skill and see what they can do with it. Because when they come back to us in the 2 weeks' time, we don't want to be back at square one and have to kind of go back over. We want to see them what they've tried to implement in their own game, and then where can we then pitch the next part of their learning. So again, the battle will come because when they go back into the community clubs will want to play certain ways because they've got a game at the weekend where, you know, they'll want to win that match or not lose that match depending on the level they're at, and that sometimes stifles the lads' ability. But to be fair, most of the coaches in the community game in our regions are superb at supporting players in terms of allowing them to a bit of guided discovery. Bear in mind, it's been bolted on with some information from us first.
So do you include the coaches within that process? To say, I hate to keep going to fly half. It's a really easy one because they get so much of the ball. But say, for example, you've got a fly half. You're really trying to encourage them to attack the line and, you know, pass late on so we can get line breaks. Would you communicate that to the coaches so that they understand if they get a couple that are, you know, intercepted during the weekend's games and stuff, it's because they're actually trying to facilitate the area you're working with them on, and to say, like, kind of encourage them to keep doing it for positive outcomes in the long term? So
not necessarily directly with the coaches. What we'll tend to do is we'll have them conversation with the players, and we try and encourage the players to use their social support network to help develop them. So again, we try and encourage the players to go back into the club and maybe share the information with coaches and other players who are not in our system, and try and understand that the people around them are there to help develop them, not necessarily to stifle what they do. So we do try and encourage the players to go and have them conversations. And again, that's really tough. Look, we're not saying it's a perfect system, because at 14, 15, for a kid to go up to his coach, which is potentially his best mate's dad, or not his best mate's dad in the other situation, and tell him that somebody at Leicester Tigers has said they'd like me to try and work on this. This is what they want me to see. That's quite a daunting prospect. Let's not say it isn't. I suppose that some of the interesting things is the players who can do that, and what does that say about them players and their development, and actually what does it say about the players who can't? It doesn't mean that they're not necessarily good players. It just means that they need help on that social support network inside. Because we know when we move up in the systems, these lads might not have, you know, myself coaching them. It might be that Steve Borthwick comes and takes the academy session. Well, you've then got to be able to interact with someone like Steve Borthwick because that's the person you're coaching. So it's just small ways to try and encourage steps what might appear in the future. Talking to people you don't normally talk to, or asking for help or support, which can be daunting, but we're trying to encourage that from.
Do you think that then helps you create more, I guess, sociable groups, but also better leaders down the line? Because if they are more self-reflective, self-aware, and are willing to almost ask for that help, and that's essentially what it is saying, listen, this is what I need help with, can you help me? When they then get to, if they've been doing that since 14, once they start getting to 17, 18, 19, 20, that's a kind of a common staple of their personality, is that they want to come and ask for help. They're going to come and say to their teammates, this is what I need from you today. Do you think that produces like leaders in the long term from your experience?
I don't know if the word is leaders. I don't know if it produces leaders. What it produces is players who have the ability to look after themselves better and manage themselves in an effective way. So whether some of them become the leaders of the groups, there's a chance that could be the case. But what it does mean is that lads can, they can be in the academy, they can be, say, gone from being selected every week in their community team to not being selected for 2 academy matches, and going well, I need to know why, and I need to do something about this. I'm going to go and speak to the coach. Like, how can I get into your team? How can I work better? Or what do I need to be more focused on? Or where do you see my weaknesses at the moment? What are my limitations? All of a sudden, that player has gained so much more by having that ability to go and have that conversation, or and then this is where it gets to, you haven't been selected, so I want them to feel comfortable in going having conversations. So if they do go and talk to the teacher at school and go like, it's a bit crap, I've not been picked again, I'm really struggling at the moment, for the teacher to go, well, let's have a conversation, let's get them emotions out of you. Or again, it's a tougher end example, but the under 15 or 16 who's not been selected, we want them to be able to go back to mum and dad and go, well, that was crap, I really didn't like that. For them to express what they're feeling and talk to people, like, and whether they develop into leaders, I don't know. But if we can develop players to be able to be more open and talking and breaking barriers behind, I shouldn't talk to that coach because it's somebody, or I find it difficult telling him that I've been asked to do this bit at the moment. Then actually, I think that would just make them better for themselves in the long run.
No, I think that's really good. Is that something that, rewinding back to start this conversation, you mentioned about being a school teacher? Would you try and integrate that if you were to ever go back into teaching, of that openness? No?
No, I'm shaking my head at the thought of going back into teaching. No, never. Yeah, look, massively. The whole background to mental health is quite personal and massive for me, and to try and be open with people and be as honest as you can, I think is really key. I think if you're open and you're honest, your messages you give are always understood, and people understand where you're coming from and recognize why you're giving them that information. And it comes back again to being, no shocks, because you're giving them as much as they can handle, as much as they can handle and need at the time. And yeah, I think if I was to be back in the school environment, it'd be very much the same. It would be understanding and explaining to pupils of, at the moment, this is where your GCSE grades are predicted, but this is what's potentially stopping you from getting this grade, or actually your behaviour at the moment is impacting pupils X, Y, and Z, or classes 1, 2, and 3, and actually the way you hold yourself around school is portraying you in this light. And I'm sure, I'd very much try and have those conversations with people, because I just think it's good to be that person and support and help them. I wouldn't do it just to make a point. I'd do it to support them. That's the difference.
Try and be honest as well. I guess that's important for the kids. If they know you're going to be honest with them, if they like it or not, they can go, I trust him. He's going to tell me what he thinks. He's going to tell me what the situation is at the moment. In terms of, obviously, we've mentioned a lot around skills there, and in terms of practice design, we've mentioned a lot about skills there, and we've mentioned a lot around practice design to look at one specific skill. When you're doing like a game prep type session or something like that, how do you go around challenging the players to incorporate all the different things that they've learned and make it more of a decision-based session? So, we're looking at it maybe being the last 5 minutes of game, we need to try to win the game. How are we going to do this? What type of skills are you going to lean on? How do you go around framing that for the boys?
So we'll create scenario-based practices as well So even within our games, we'll sometimes create scenario-based practices. So we'll stick time constraints onto the game, or like you say, create the scenario where you're winning or losing, or there's a need for something to happen. And especially within the DPP, like I said, the volunteer coaches are brilliant. They come up with some really good ideas. When we get into the academy, what we try to do is we try and lean a little bit more onto who would be our leaders in areas of the field, and get them to come up with the scenarios or the situations they want to go through or practice or try and rehearse and things like that. So we'll try and encourage lads to have more ownership of what that is and what that looks like. And then you'll have conversations prior to the sessions where you might try and just scaffold some of the thoughts, but also you'll let them just go free as well, and then have the reflective conversations in the week after. So within the academy, there's definitely a number of conversations that will take place prior and after training sessions where we'll reflect on what we were looking at. Did we get the best out of how it was? Did we create environments where that was put under stress or duress, or and get them to try and solve as many problems as they can, either they can come up with or we give them.
And I'm guessing, you're doing all of this work so that when they start getting into the under 18s age group, into the academy setup, and they're playing, other academy teams, Sales, Newcastle, Saracens, that actually they've got experience of the skill set required for that environment. So be it a wet and windy day, and actually we're just going to have to play for yardage, and we're going to play for our pack, or whether it's a really expansive day and we can see that they're not the great when we're causing a bit of chaos. They've got the toolkit to be able to exploit whatever scenario presents itself.
Yeah, and we're not overly explicit in terms of exactly what they have to do, and from an early age. So because of that, every game is still a really good learning opportunity for them. It's not a test. The game's not a test for us. It's almost like an assessment if we went back to some sort of schooling thing. And it's like at the end of the test, you either pass or fail. Whereas in an assessment, we just monitor and see where we're at, and then carry on working to see if we can get better. And our game's very much like that. Like, we'll have ideas of how we want to play, and we'll do some video analysis of our opponents, and we'll do some game review, and we'll discuss where we think we're going to be strong and play to our strengths and identify our opponent's weaknesses. But actually, there'll be moments in the games that we could never plan for, or scenarios will happen that actually we couldn't replicate or create, or and because of that, the lads have got to learn as they go along as well. And we won't necessarily run messages on the pitch which tell them what to do or what to identify. We'll leave them. We'll let them go and do it. And if we don't get the result, then we don't get the result. But if we then get to the back end of the season and a similar scenario occurs and we get a better outcome, we know that learning has taken place and our players have learned from the past experiences.
Yeah, and does it make it more interesting for your games program? Because I imagine if everyone's got a similar model, like you could play, your Northampton one week, and they might be, smashing it long, turning, chasing, but then the following week they're chucking it around. So actually, for your guys, it's a really, they have to play what's ahead of them, not what they're expecting. If you know what I mean?
Yeah, massively. And then look, there's a couple of academies who there's a large majority of academies who play very, very differently. There's only probably a handful who have some very, very similar traits, but there are some academies who play such different rugby that the lads have to be adaptable and have to understand what they're going up in front of, and that's ideal for their development, because when they get into the highest level of the game where they want to be, they have to be able to play one week in a particular way and maybe replicate that for 12 matches. Finally, then get called into a rep team, or doesn't happen as much in rugby, but your head coach leaves and a new coach comes in with a completely different playing style, or you get sent on loan because actually you're not ready to play in that level, and if you can't go and play at your loan club and adapt to what they do, then are you going to get pulled back into your senior club? So yeah, it's brilliant that it gives them such variety. And it's really beneficial for them, in my opinion, that they get to experience so many different opportunities.
Perfect. So, listen, last question for me, and it might be a challenging one, but who's the best player or coach you've worked with or against, and why?
Great question. Best player I played with is probably a guy called James Roby, who is still playing right now. And I only played with him as he was coming through the academy at Saints. He went into the first team and way, way ahead of schedule probably, but he was the fittest bloke on the field. he was the toughest bloke I've seen in terms of not big in stature, but he wraps up 50 tackles a game. He'll hit the ball at the base of the ruck and he'd be gone. You'd have to be on his back foot just to stay in contact with him. He would change the point of the game within seconds. He was phenomenal. And there's some very good players who've been in the environments before, but he was something else. In terms of coaches, there's two, and they're at two ends of the spectrum. So I mentioned him already. So I'll be honest, I sent this coach a message because I had to send him a message because I needed to clear my own conscience that I didn't appreciate what he did when he did it and how he did it. And now that I've become a coach and I've gone through some stuff, I realise everything that he did was in the best interest of me, and I just didn't accept it because I was a moody young kid who thought I was better than I was. And that guy is Sean Wayne. And actually, for what he tried to do and help me, actually was really impressive. And what he's got on to do as a coach is second to none. But the second one is a bloke called Tom Harrison. I've only known Tom 5 years. We both met at Loughborough College. So when I started the Rugby League programme, he started the Rugby Union programme. And I have to take my hat off to him. He's my sounding board for practically everything. And he's probably the hardest working coach I've ever met. Really diligent in what he does. Asks lots and lots of questions. Annoys me at times because he's definitely a scrum coach, or he'll hate me saying that. He's a forwards coach, and he always has an opinion on what I could do better as a backs coach. And sometimes you're like, but actually he's challenging me and making me a better coach and challenging me to be better. And look, the evidence of how good a coach he is only at the forefront as he's now in the first team coaching staff at Leicester Tigers at 30. I think he'll go a long way as a coach. He's a very, very good coach. Good bloke as well, obviously. So
perfect. Listen, two really, really good, three really, really good answers, and really appreciate your time. Loads of interesting stuff there, and hopefully we can catch up again soon.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. It's been great fun. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.